Hi there, and welcome to episode 66 of the Analyst Brief podcast, brought to you by the Cyber Hut. My name is Simon Moffatt, founder, analyst at the Cyber Hut, and with me as ever is co-host Mr. David Mahdi. David, how are we doing?
I'm fantastic. Simon, I love the hat. Very festive. And
well, I was going to say you've got a hat on as well. It's getting cold. We're into the festive period. You can see my flashing lights. I don't know how long these flashing lights will last. It's not an internet connected one, I hasten to add. It's just a purely
look at that. It's all throughout the whole hat.
Traditional offline hat. So these are rechargeable batteries, so we'll see if it lasts the full, 45, 50 minutes.
Or are you using OpenAI Sora to generate your hat right now?
I can take it off, actually. Yeah, there's a bit of hair under there. It's definitely a real hat. It's getting cold, so you better get your hat on. And you've got some nice, relatively festive headwear as well, headgear.
Yeah, it's a nice Canadian toque, as we would say, or down here in my neck of the woods in California, they would say a beanie, but this is more of a toque. I'm going to go with a toque.
It's not a beanie. It's got long bits. It's got long bits.
It's the long bits. I don't know. We're not going to go into maybe the formal definition of toques versus beanies and what they mean, right? But we're kind of taking an analyst perspective. Maybe we would rip that apart. But no, it's just absolutely great to see you, Simon. I think unfortunately, I caught something at the Gartner Identity and Access Management Conference last week. So I think it's just, knock on wood, just a little kind of head cold. But I think you were traveling as well.
I've been around. I've been traveling, a few smaller events. I was at Black Hat at the same time as you in London, which is the Black Hat Europe. Obviously, Black Hat, everyone knows. Black Hat goes around the world, goes around the globe in Vegas, in Singapore, and Riyadh, and they do all of the online stuff, which is, I track a lot of that virtually. And the Europe event is in London, which is a little bit easier to get to for me, based in the UK. So I was down there for a couple of days, which is... It's great. It's a great conference. I want to say a good shout out to them. It's getting bigger and bigger per year, and it was at the Excel in London, which is a big conference venue there. And I don't know what the official numbers were, but probably 2,500, 3,000, I suppose. Very well run, lots and lots of different tracks, and lots of. There's always 5 or 6 sessions running simultaneously. So you've got to try and, as RSA does, you've got to sort of navigate and snake your way through the content, which is of interest, and content which may surprise you a little bit, which is always good. And for me, as always, meeting vendors in the exhibition area. And there's also Black Hat, for those who don't go. There's also an area called the Arsenal, which is they run this on both days, and it's basically just back-to-back demos of tooling which has been created. So essentially every sort of 3 hours, they'll rotate 6 different presenters, and they all present at the same time. So it's a bit of a logistical nightmare of trying to sort of hear, all these presentations happening at once. And these are all sort of open source tools, scanning tools, audit tools, extensions, all sorts of fun and games. Some are, more developed than others, I guess. And obviously I was certainly looking at anything with that identity angle, and things like SAML, token forgery stuff, all the things which you think sort of been and done. Clearly, there's loads and loads of vulnerabilities exist in the wild regarding Active Directory, OAuth 2, Cloud Federation, Workload Federation, SAML, all of these different things. There's loads and loads of tools around scanning stuff, auditing things, looking for vulnerabilities, proof of concepts, and all that stuff. So it is always a very dynamic and fast-paced world. And touch wood, wherever the wood may be, we're having a super flu pandemic in the UK at the minute. So it seems to be crippling everything currently, the NHS and other. But I've managed to escape this so far. My family's been down with this illness, but I've so far been immune to it all. I had my flu jab, so everyone's going down like flies as they speak. So hopefully everyone's safe and well outside in the real world, listening in wherever you are. But maybe let's kick off with Gartner. Over there, over Grapevine, Texas. Obviously, Gartner IAM. It's like two venues per year, isn't there? There's one in London, one in Texas, and then they do the SRM, the security risk management one as well. And obviously, there's lots of other Gartner events. But I guess those two, the SRM and identity, are the ones which are the same different. So what was it like in Texas for identity?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? Just the insider track of being a former Gartner analyst. Traditionally, yes, like the EMEA one, which is in London, is usually March timeframe, right?
Yeah.
And then the North America one, which tends to be bigger, is usually like end of November, first week of December. Past 2 years, it's been December 8th to the 11th. A little bit too deep in December for my liking, but whatever. No, but so having been a former analyst that was the chair of that event, and collaborated with the chair of the London event at that time, which was Akif Khan. We obviously try to make sure they're consistent, but it's interesting because you would think that the EMEA one, since it's earlier in the year, would kind of kick off the whole theme, but at least during my tenure, it was like the other way around, where the North America one, because it was bigger, was seen as more the flagship of Gartner's identity events, because they only had the two. And so it's done at like this time of year where it's the end of year. And so the theme this year, which I think should get picked up into next year with EMEA, although they do contextualize it for UK and European region. This year is just identity at the core, really looking at identity as, you can still use the term fabric and these types of things, but just thinking of identity, as I'm sure you and I know, and many of our listeners, as like infrastructure, as like that core tier zero, as they called it, platform that you can build off of. But when you view it that way, much like you're building pillars in a building or for a highway, it's got to be resilient, right? Because if something goes wrong at a foundational level, some bad things can happen, as we've known in our industry. Whenever you have outages or a breach that takes down identity systems, it can be catastrophic. So they were talking about that, obviously acknowledging agentic AI. I think, Simon, I'm sure when you talk about Black Hat, and even you and I thinking about the whole year, agentic AI really started to kind of take over the marketing messages, I would say, maybe 7-8 months ago.
I would
Into
say probably,
here,
yeah.
RSA, so much so that it just, I think it absolutely is confusing for a lot of people. Big demand there, but I'll touch on that in a moment. And then, of course, the whole notion of machine identity, workload identity, non-human identities, all of these things really big trends as we're there. And of course, the Magic Quadrant for access management, Gartner has multiple, but that tends to be one of the big ones with identity. And since it's a Gartner conference, that was the MQ for access management was a big area that for sure I had a lot of discussions around. And of course, I work for Transmit Security, and Transmit Security just got listed as a leader in the MQ. So that was exciting for Transmit and myself, and a lot of clients, just generating awareness, and the fact that I think Transmit's the youngest competitor, certainly in the leaders quadrant, because a lot of those vendors that were in there been pillars of the industry for decades. Really good company for Transmit to be in. So that was really exciting. I think not just for Transmit though. If I remove myself outside of Transmit Security, I think anecdotally, a lot of folks said, "Hey, this is exciting because identity's had these players in the industry for a while, and to see a new entrant come in, it's really kind of showcasing like innovation." And the good thing is that when the water rises, all the boats float. So I think it's just seen as a good signal for innovation across the board. So that was kind of exciting, personally and for Transmit, but I think it absolutely did have a measurable impact on the conference itself. But I think it was around 2,000 people. I think it was certainly well attended, and the attendees I talked to, all of them were Gartner clients, and they tend to use the Gartner research and frameworks, planning their people, process, and tech. And the last bit was I actually did a couple presentations there. So one on machine identity, and that was with AppViewX. And the other one was actually really interesting. It was like a roundtable where it was closed off. You had to register beforehand, and no vendors were allowed. And it was Aaron Sutton, he's in the office of the CISO for Google Cloud, and myself. And we ran a session on, effectively it was consumer browsers being like the Trojan horse for agents. And I have to say, like, one, a lot of the audience was, roughly familiar with AI browsers, but they were blown away, as you and I have discussed, like, hey, this is actually going to make creating agents insanely easy for the average person, because they can just click agent mode. And we are not prepared from a consumer identity and consumer fraud perspective to handle that. That was acknowledged. And a lot of them were just begging for models and research and help to actually like tackle it, because I think we realize network layer stuff, there's things we can do, but it's not going to be as effective. And bot detection, a lot of the traditional things that we've done in the anti-fraud space and even IAM space are just not going to be as effective, because everything's going to look like a bot. And then, of course, that kind of went over into conversations like, well, hey, are AI browsers going to be something we're going to be using internally? And so it was interesting having Google there, because they talked about, Gemini and their approach. And they absolutely, certainly in the latest version of Gemini, because you see Sam Altman and OpenAI kind of freaking out, their code red thing. Gemini is quite formidable. It's not perfect. None of them are, but it's quite good. But the advantage they have, obviously, is, Google Cloud, all the services, and they have Chrome. And, they said, overall, they've turned the dial down. So, when you search for something, there's AI mode, but they just said, they are being very risk centric about turning on Gemini in these browsers. Whereas you look at Atlas with OpenAI, they're going ahead. And so a use case would be a user, whether they're internally, say they're internal, pasting corporate sensitive information, maybe including a document, into the search bar.
Yeah.
And remember, in these browsers, the search bar is an LLM. So it could actually just take that information, and it's not, protected. It's not, sensitive. Whereas if you have your own corporate instance of ChatGPT or whatever, you could put it in there and there's a little bit more control around it. So I think Google's kind of saying, hey, we've heard feedback in the market about Chrome, and we don't want to put the cart before the horse. We want to make sure that organizations are comfortable, and we have to guide them along. Anyway, I'll stop there. But those were, obviously, it still keeps coming back to identity, but there's definitely excitement in the industry. And then actually, last thing I'll say, and we probably want to tackle it as a separate thing on its own, but maybe they designed it by purpose. But I was with our good friend Henrique for a good chunk of the week, did the identity beer stuff. Savient announcing that they raised $700 million.
Yeah, 700. Yeah.
I think they rolled that into the week as well. So anyway, I'll stop there.
a lot going on. I mean, there's a lot, as always, there's a lot to unpack in some of this. I think the identity at the core thing, it's something obviously we've talked about the podcast for a long number of years. I've talked about it as an analyst for a long time. There is a structural change to how I think identity is, how it's been managed, how it's been funded, how you measure success, both within B2E and B2C. It's just the positioning of it has changed, gravitationally it's changed, which is good and bad. In good in the sense of it can empower the zero trust thing. It can do productivity and improve productivity for standard users being onboarded, all that IGA stuff, but also things like improving privileged access to workloads, NHIs and others, as well as this zero trust thing, which we're still trying to transition to after 15 years, where identity is really part of that continuous auth and continuous authorization, the sort of PEP, PDP model thing, which again has been around 15 years and it's really been sharpened with things like Open Policy Agent and a whole host of sort of different ways of doing authorization. So identity has definitely moved from over here to being in the middle. Now, I think the industry needs to catch up a little bit. Some organizations entirely embrace this and they have the correct reporting lines and reporting models, and they really understand what identity can do for them. If it's B2E, empowering data security, protect anything everywhere, zero perimeters sort of stuff, accessing cloud federation, everything else. And they understand that without identity working, all of that data, network, endpoint stuff doesn't work either. So it's quite a mature organization. Clearly, a lot of others aren't quite there yet. Even some of the really bigger organizations tend to still have identity legacy, on-prem identity systems, IGA, PAM, and other. Then they pull in a few cloud things, which are very fast to get started, but maybe only roll out to one or two systems for, I don't know, maybe it's NHI discovery, or maybe it's a type of authentication, or maybe it's part of the sort of workload management aspect. So there's lots of little cloud aspects in there. I think the big issue, though, with identity at the core, it is about metrics, and it's about communications, and it's about saying, look, identity isn't just about MFA. It's like, oh, well, we're doing MFA, we're getting there. And actually, I do quite a lot of authentication assessments. I've done them for years and years. And it's like, you go in and, okay, what MFA systems do you have? Probably somewhere between 3 and 5 for a big organization, or sort of 10,000 users. So you've got 3 or 5 different MFAs. Okay, so why is that the case? Well, legacy, budget, different use cases. Maybe you've got USB keys versus WebAuthn versus passkeys or whatever. So you've got this spectrum of security, a spectrum of usability, and when you actually dig into the numbers, it's probably like 60% MFA enrollment. So it's not ideal, right? It's quite low enrollment, usability issues. Anyway, so most organizations tackle MFA and then they step back and disappear. And it's like, well, as we've always described, you need to think about IDV, fraud, onboarding. What for staff? Yes, for staff, definitely for staff. And then you look at authorization, access control, and then you talk about NHI workload and credential management, all of this other stuff. So I think organizations need to say and understand what identity is doing, how's it helping, where is it hindering, what metrics should we pick? Is it helping productivity? If so, how? If it's improving fraud, if so, how? And picking things to analyze there. So I think identity is at the core. That isn't a biased thing, being an analyst, but I think it is at the core. And I think there's a lot of, I've said this before on the podcast as well, the last 2 years, a lot of the people that engage and use our content are not identity people. They are enterprise architects, solution architects, data security, network security, cyber threat intel, DFIR, digital forensics and response, security operations, because they're all either integrating with identity or have to have identity knowledge to make their platforms work. So I think that is really, really powerful. I think to make and engage those people, though, you have to use different language, different metrics. It isn't about productivity. It's about, as we've said, micro attack, cyber threat intel, attack frameworks, response frameworks, all of the terminology and language that was at Black Hat last week, for example. It's a different conversation. So I 100% agree. Identity core is great. I think whatever, call it fabric, infrastructure, doesn't really bother me so much. But I think getting those tentacles of identity into all parts of the business, it does require some changes to the usage, words, communications, and not just OAuth2, SAML, all of that good stuff. That's good. It needs to move on to different areas for me, I think, and that's pretty evident, I think.
Well, and I think we need that necessary and plumbing, right? To be there. It's foundational. It's a part of the foundation, and we need to have those standards so that services, products, etc. Can talk to each other. And I think coming into this podcast recently, right? Anthropic donated their work on MCP to the Linux Foundation, which is a good kind of move to say, hey, we've used our resources to get it to this point. And we believe this is a promising framework for agent to agent, communications and interoperability going forward, and kind of giving it there. And we saw the same thing in many ways with the FIDO Alliance and the work that they've done in. I always describe it to people who don't really know our space that well. I say it's like they created Bluetooth for authentication, right? And it's like I'm like, if you had you bought new headphones and you had to install drivers for every device you use, your car, your TV, your laptop, right? Like it's not manageable. And they came in to bring like basically Bluetooth so everything can operate. Like, oh, that makes sense. And it's like, we need that work going on. But what ends up happening is that it sometimes becomes, we get obsessed about the solutions themselves and we forget about, and you and I have talked about this now since pretty much the beginning of this podcast, going back years, about focusing on like business enablement and the business outcomes. And that's and that's the thing I'm getting excited about with what you're talking about with identity, is that like, look, I'm a cybersecurity person, like at the core, but I got into identity later on. It's been nearly 2 decades in identity, but I got into it after, and it was just such a fascinating area because it's like, it's customer experience, it's user experience, it's with government identity, it's like, it's passports, it's border control, right? So security is there, but it's not all about security. It enables all of these things. And unlike, like a endpoint detection and response, where its sole job is to just look for, threats and issues, identity, says, oh, this is also enables loyalty, right? This is Simon. Okay, great. Based on this, now let me present, I don't know, this service, right? Let me present this information to him that he might want at this given time. Like, that's what's so exciting with identity. And in doing that personalization, you're also like, well, I know it's not him logging in, and these behaviors look like a threat actor, so I'm going to stop, right? And then obviously as we go into the future, it's like, oh, this is Simon's agent. I know his agent because I've done provenance checks on where it was generated. And I can tell, that his agent typically wants to do a money transfer points, do this, do this, do this. These are like the 6 behaviors we know. Oh, it's trying to do a 7th behavior we've never seen before. I'll bring Simon back into the loop as a human, right? So without having identity at the core, what they're saying, I don't see how we can have a future where it's, again, going around to 5 million devices, installing 20 drivers on each one, right? You want it to be
100%. But I guess, but to that point, you talk about Bluetooth there, and I guess there's a whole different thing there to unpick around, how frequently that's been updated and the issues it has. The worry is identity becomes like that, in the sense it becomes very fragile and static. And it's like, well, we've done the LDAP thing, we've done MFA, we've done PAM. You're still going to get breached because the world outside, the threat world and the usability world, B2C world, and all that stuff, it's changing every day, not every month or week or year. It's daily, based on competitive pressures. So if there's a challenger bank who can onboard a customer faster, they're going to win. So their user experience wins. But equally, whatever their success, that's going to attract the bad guys. So that it's very much a rapid thing. So back to that issue there around identity is going to have more demands placed upon it, and not just hygiene and sorting the runtime behavior out, but all of the information within this identity layer has to be bidirectionally pushing in and out to all of these new platforms. We all have different success criteria, and it's it's very nascent, I guess, in that respect currently. And there's a real journey for identity to be really dynamically involved in the packet level protection, if you're looking at the network, right the way through to encryption of a piece of data and then being able to decrypt that. Okay, well, where does the identity aspect play into this? I'm not talking like a JOT token or some sort of big building block stuff. It's much more implicit into all of these small nano decision-making angles. And identity is not there. I'll be blunt, it isn't there. But my view is it will at least be in a position to be so embedded into all of those sort of transactions and stuff. And I think it's good to hear that sort of core thing. I think there's a lot of sort of stuff to be done. But I think it's a positive thing. It's a positive thing. You mentioned Savient there for a second.
Yes,
yeah. I mean, let's call out some numbers there. $700 million funding round for them. A whole host of different funding parties in there. I'm sure everyone's got Google. They can Google that one. So congratulations to Sachin and all of the team over there. I used to work with Sachin long time ago, back in Value, when we were doing role-based access control. Can you believe it? RBAC is still a thing 20 years later.
Come on.
It was at Black Hat last week, actually, RBAC. Sachin, he built Value, became Sunroll manager, became Oracle Identity Analytics, Securonics thing, and then the Savient thing. So, vast experience in understanding the problems in identity I guess two things. One, the problems that need to be fixed, and B, people who are willing to pay for those problems to be fixed. I think it's quite a simple statement, but there are a lot of solution-led organizations in the world who build solutions and then try and find a problem to build a customer base. But Savient has been around for a long time, big customer base. They're talking about this combined story now, which is quite interesting. There's this combination of B2C, B2E, NHI, Agentic, the tentacles, obviously, of identity get bigger. And I guess time will tell whether the world is ready for like a super band, if you like, or a super, I don't know what it is, a super, I can't think of a better analogy. It's like a band that can play all your songs. It's like just a bit of classic, a bit of metal, a bit of drum and bass, and all that stuff. So, congratulations to them. It's definitely not easy at the minute to get funding, and that's a big chunk of change. So it'd be interesting how they spend that.
I'll put my financial analyst hat on, because I always like to do that. I'm a nerd when it comes to IPOs and venture capital and just looking at financial performance, right? I mean, that was one thing that, again, as an analyst, it's like, especially if they're publicly traded, you could take a quick look at their balance sheet and get an idea, right, of their health. And then you can take a further look into certain trends. Be like, oh, okay, they spent a lot on capital this year, and so now they're trying to switch over or whatever. So a couple things, right? One, as we came into this year, in our space, 2 IPOs of note. SailPoint, for sure, because it's directly identity, and they're a competitor, right? Their IPO, we came into this year, we had a new administration, which, has had, unlike, every administration has an impact on, the markets, right? This one for sure, I think, just with a lot of the, tariffs and all these things, and we're not going to get into that, but the sheer objective point that you could make the argument that they've had a big impact, positive, negative, neutral, on markets versus other administrations. So I think SailPoint coming in, I think that was January, they IPO'd, and I think that's just been kind of viewed as, somewhat mediocre, but, you correct me if I'm wrong. And then the second one was Netscope. And I think Netscope kind of had a similar type thing, as well. So if you look at a Savient, and they're a mature company, it's not like a brand new company where they're doing a big Series A raise and transitioning from an early stage. For them, you could have been like, could they have IPO'd, right? Maybe if the market conditions were different. And Simon, I'll put it to you as well, like having had the experience at ForgeRock, going from being privately owned to that. Like, what are your thoughts? Because that was the first thing that struck me before I talked to Henrique and all those folks. To me, I was like, oh, they're a potential IPO candidate, but just with the current atmosphere and uncertainty, people might hold off. But yeah,
I think there's two things I'd mention here. I think IPOs aren't always dependent on the IPO company. So you're absolutely right. You're hugely dependent on the outside market. So you're hugely reliant on macroeconomic conditions, the microeconomic market you're launching from. So obviously probably the US, and then the sector you're launching into, which is it identity or is it cyber? SailPoint, CyberArk. It's cyber, because that is it's more well known. If you're a financial fund manager, do you have any understanding or interest in IGA and PAM and NHI? Probably not. You're looking at, as you say, looking at the bare numbers. So it is looking at repeatability. It is looking at the ability to predict, and not just predicting well either. I think there's often a mistake around, you're a company, private company. I want to predict big numbers. Q3, Q4, blah, blah, 40% year on year. Now, if you get those numbers wrong as a private company, you just piss off your sales reps, because it's really difficult to then hire. And you do that wrong in a public company, you're absolutely toast, right? So you have to be expert and really understand both your internal mechanics and also be able to predict effectively. Now, I'm not saying that isn't the case with Savient, but I think if you are looking at an IPO, that there's things that you can control and there's things you can't. And obviously, I went through an IPO with ForgeRock. Clearly, it takes a long time. It's a 18 months, probably more journey really to get, like an athlete planning for the World Cup or the Olympics. You don't just decide in March
We should do it
the
next
Olympics
week.
are coming up. Let's have a go at this.
Yeah.
It's a 4-year thing, right? So you are looking at repeatability. You're looking at subscription revenue. If you maybe had perpetual revenue in the past, you're looking at being able to have good net promoter scores, good customer satisfaction, ability to predict and know where your peaks and troughs are going to be and how to flatten some of that stuff out and really normalize both revenue and revenue recognition, all that sort of stuff. And that takes a long time. Now, clearly, Savient had been around for a long time, but equally, they maybe, I don't know their internal mechanics, of course, but maybe that internal machinery needs to be still done. Cloud, SaaS, subscription-based pricing, all of that predictability and repeatability is all got into that first. And even if you have done that, then you are reliant on the external market stuff, which at the minute, maybe it would work or maybe it wouldn't. The markets are very, very high. As we know, everyone's expecting some sort of correction at some point, especially in the AI world, but that's a different thing. So there's too many variables, I guess. But I guess my final question would be, where does Sapient go now? Because that's a lot of money, $3 billion valuation, if not more. That's a big number. So, it narrows down who can buy them, if that's a possibility. 2-3 years, how big? What does success look like if you have 700 mil war chest plus whatever revenue generation they have prior? Where do they go next?
Yeah, I mean, if we're reflecting on this year, a couple things. So one, I'll just hit on Okta really quick. I think in their last report, if you kind of go through it, the signal that I got out of it was that they're not a hypergrowth. They're out of the hypergrowth story now, right? Like growth at all costs. Let's spend money and just grow. Get into those like multiple double digits, right? Like into the 20s and 30% growth. And to your point, when you're in the public market and Okta's been there, they just I think want to be seen as just a reliable kind of company in a space that you can invest in, and your money's well positioned with someone like an Okta. And so I think now they're switching over to profitability and consolidation, which was kind of interesting because I think prior to COVID, that's what they were like. They were hypergrowth. COVID happened. Everyone was out secure access. Everything went online. Identity got even more pressure, right? Like I took thousands of inquiry calls on all this stuff. And then obviously 21 comes around and the world's slowly opening up and things start happening. And Okta was definitely one that went through periods of layoffs to kind of right size the company. And they weren't alone. There were a lot of others that did that around that time. So you're like, hold on, didn't you kind of go through this like growth at all costs and focus on optimization and whatever? So it kind of seems like they're doing it again. And what's interesting is they're doing it again at a time where they're positioning the company as like their new tagline I saw is like, we secure AI. So I'm like, okay, I don't, most people who know who Okta is they don't associate that. And I think not that they can't, but today it just seems like that's a tad bit too marketing overhang. But I'm bringing that up because you mentioned, the predictability and all that. And I think the market kind of sees them that way. But then you look at a Savient who, if you do go public, you are now taking on a lot of, red tape that inevitably you have to, have. And when you stay private, you're at a little more liberty to have much more flexibility as in terms of, as you mentioned, those numbers, right? You can say, we're going to spend, let's just say, I mean, I don't know. Okay. So this is my guess. Let's spend 26 on maintaining really good growth, but let's lean in heavily in the next 6 to 8 months on innovation because maybe we want to go all in on machine identity and NHI. And we see that as like our North Star to compete with the SailPoint and Okta and others that are in the identity space. So there's that angle. The other one I'll just say really quick as well is, I'm going to sound like I'm crazy, but hold on. Is 700 million actually a lot of money? It is, right? Absolutely. Yeah. But when you look at like Palo Alto bought CyberArk just a few months ago for $25 billion. Island, who is in the browser space, they've raised in total, 730 million? So if you are there, and I believe I extrapolated this from their press release, Sapiens, if you were really trying to create a category, raising $30 million is not enough in our space to create a category. Raising 300 is still not enough, in my opinion, to create a category. Like you can. I'm not saying it's insurmountable, but I think what investors are seeing is that I don't want to just back Savient. I want to back Savient as a Trojan horse or tip of the spear to redefine the market. And we believe Sachin and the team and their technology can do that. That, to me, that was my overall takeaway, was that, okay, we want to be a category creator, maybe killer, and take on your SailPoints of the world and your other IGA companies.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to hear your thoughts on it. I've rattled off there, but that's
one final comment on this, I guess, is the innovation thing versus being reliable. Okay, so there's a lot of companies who get to a certain age who want to be innovative. And by this, it could be whatever, new features. You mentioned the agentic thing. You go to RSA, right, we're innovative, we are powered by AI, we secure AI, we're just AI. And we're seen as being innovative. And it's like everyone, the middle-aged bloke thinking he's 17 again, trying to be cool. Now, ironic, it's quite interesting, this, because ironically, if you are, let's just pick an Okta, right? If you are a public company, investors don't want you to be cool and innovative and 17. They want you to be 20% ROI, because they're going to invest whatever, 2 billion from a pension fund. They don't want you to be cool on the next best thing. They want you to guarantee 20%, 28%, 18% every single quarter, because that's what they want, because they want a return on investment. Now, it's really interesting when you then start to see middle-aged men, wearing cool stuff, trying to be young. That's a really weird, awkward thing, because they ironically then look older than they are. So my point really being is, if you are a vendor of a certain age, 10, 12 years, whatever, and you suddenly are trying to be innovative, or you are trying to spend, or you are trying to change your direction, two things happen. One, there's a massive difference between your existing customers and your customer support function. And you'll see a lot of drop off where you'll just see people saying, the software doesn't work. Don't like that vendor, doesn't work. It's like, well, hang on. The vendor's been around forever and they have massive, massive boatloads of software. Something must work. But that analogy of it doesn't work is nothing to do with the software. It's to do with the customer success function being entirely different to the roadmap function of that business. And it's because they're not being heard, not being listened to. And it's if you sell whatever you sell, widgets, and then suddenly you're selling electronic toothbrushes, and you're saying that's the future, that's the vision. If the people who buy the widgets don't want those toothbrushes, you have a major, major problem. And that's where you have this, we're innovative, we're changing, we're market creating, or whatever. It's a real dichotomy. You'll start to see the evidence of that in various parts of the business, which you may not expect to see it. And customer success function would be one of them. So are they going to create a category? I don't know about this. Whatever. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I think it's always very interesting when there's this constant chase for innovation and the next new thing. Where really, you expect a 2-3-year-old business to be doing this, who are, on the real cusps of building not to 1 to 100 business. But as soon as you get repeatable customers, that innovation slows down, and it probably should slow down. I did a course on this years and years ago from the University in Holland, an innovation management course, really fascinating around. It's quite rare these days to have like a skunk works part of the business that does all this cool sort of gadget stuff, and they're streaming ahead. Innovation actually comes from all parts of the business, from customer support, fixing bugs, how sales operate. Innovation happens at all parts, because that then gives you this cadence to really, really transform how you do stuff. Otherwise, you end up like a Kodak, and you end up being out of business in so fast, because your innovation cycle and your core customers become hugely, hugely disconnected. So I don't know whether, if that applies to you, but innovation really is not, isn't just about marketing and buzz. It really, really isn't. It's about embedding that culture across the business and moving all at the same pace. But yeah, I think in some respects, 700 million is a lot. In other respects, based on the ambition, maybe it's not. But I think equally, it gives them lots of options. My comment, I suppose, would be you can do everything. You have to be very specific on what you want to do next and how you measure that, because at some point that 700 million has to translate into whatever, an acquisition or an IPO or whatever's next, whatever comes, for them at their sort of journey's end, I guess. But good luck to them. They're on a roll, it seems.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
spend it wisely.
either way to just to kind of put a button on that one. I think it's still just more signals, just showing again, Simon, you and I, obviously we're going to be biased in this space, but it has been a pretty insane year of the industry just going identity. You're kind of important, I think if you were to smack me on the head and I had to guess that's, I'd just say like that was my takeaway of 25. I mean, 25 has been an amazing year with identity, and some of it I'm saying finally, especially when I look at the cybersecurity vendors going, hey folks, you need to know who's coming into your house before you let them do things. And I'm sorry, but the EDR platforms haven't done that for a long time. And so it's good to see they're coming more to the table. And then also on the other end, the identity vendors going, oh, what is it? I mean, whatever, you don't have to call it this, but just for lack of something to put it together, ITDR, right? Like identity platforms becoming more threat aware because, I don't want someone resetting their account and coming in and going to the IAM portal and adding all these rights and entitlements and deploying malware. Like, I'm sorry, but you know who you are in the industry and you know that you allowed that to happen. I don't blame the practitioners. I blame the tech providers that built that. Like, shame on you. You've known about cyber threats for a long time and you've known that they've been going after identity. So this year, it's good to see the money coming behind it. And I think we can start to kind of see maybe what will happen in 26. But
That's good. It's a good bookend there. Actually, maybe it's park that under the umbrella of 2025. I think it's been a great year. You've got the saving thing, Palo Alto, CyberArk, big multi-billion-dollar thing there going on. Lots of new startups, lots of funding coming in, lots of non-identity people joining this bandwagon, which I think is absolutely great. So I want to segue just a little bit briefly to let's do this first. Let's a quick review of Black Hat quickly, and I want to then pull in the OWASP. The OWASP top 10 has been updated for agentic, which I think is a very fascinating thing. And then we're going to sort of end 2025 talking about a little bit of maybe some predictions. Predictions are always quite fun, aren't they? Everyone gets predictions wrong, and don't hold us too much to those. So there's a couple of things in Black Hat I want to just pull up. I mean, I won't going to go through all this stuff, but there's a couple of things which were interesting to me. And clearly there's lots of research and stuff in there. And there was two or three bits of research. And I'm not going to go through them technically. You can read those online if you so wish. But there was two or three that were supply chain related. And it's something that we've talked about a lot in the past, and Okta themselves have been part of that, machine, and SolarWinds, and there's a whole host of other attacks which have really been big, complex, insidious attacks. And I think as we move to this sort of world of everything's highly interdependent. So whether you're in identity or not, you need a software supply chain, you need a supplier supply chain, if that doesn't sound too much of an oxymoron, a whole host of SaaS providers, but the SaaS providers are probably leveraging a CSP under the hood. So maybe your sort of accountancy app, which you pay whatever £100 a month for, relies on AWS, and so there's this continual sort of tiering of outage response stuff, and then you wrap in a Cloudflare or CDM, so there's a whole host of interdependency things there. And yet another example of Black Hat last week around an MDM product essentially had a credential issue, a bit of memory dumping in Java and Tomcat. Credentials were leaked into a database, and this essentially nation-state style attacks, so complicated stuff. But the point I really want to make is that MDM platform, it wasn't the MDM platform, it was all of the customers on that mobile device management platform. And then in turn, all of the mobiles that were hanging off that, irregardless of the version of mobile. So whether it was iPhone, Samsung, a whole host of different versions in there. So instead of just targeting Simon, let's target whatever. I'm not going to tell you what phone I use, but target the brand of phone. And then instead of just targeting that brand of phone, you can target it. So the attack entry point becomes bigger and bigger. So it just happened it was an identity-esque. It was a bit more than that, actually. It was a bit of lateral movement and
Yeah.
stuff. But I just want to amplify again, we're entering this world of a highly dependent nature. You know, we talked about the outages recently with AWS, and you know, we're not picking on them. There's outages every month, I suppose, big ones. And it's like, you know, we are getting into a position where interdependency is a problem. Identity is foundational. So we need to think about resilience at this identity layer. But equally, there's only so much you can control. If, say, you're a mid-sized bank, 50,000 staff, whatever, there's only so much you can control. A lot of that is in your software supply chain based on your agreements, on your cloud responsibility models, on your threat awareness. You know, you may have a superb employee identity verification process, but maybe the suppliers that you're operating with do not, and maybe the support team for the supplier who operates. So the tiering just goes so far away from you that you really don't have full control and visibility over things. So that was, it seems a bit of a thread. Some of these complex attacks, they aren't going directly to the bank. They'll go 2 or 3 layers deep. They'll big platform providers, software platform providers. Yes, it may be a 0 day, which impossible to defend against. But again, that resilience nature in the sense of there's only so much you can do really under your control, and there's going to be certain things which are just outside of your control, and you need to start thinking as an organization, recovery, resiliency. What does that mean? How do you recover? What does resiliency mean? Really, is it about getting something up and running in a degraded fashion? Is it about, you know, changing how you deliver services online or whatever it can be? So yeah, there's a lot of that going on, which was highlighted in there, which is it's difficult to defend against.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Simon. I mean, again, it's having managed, you know, these platforms, MDMs, going back to Bez with BlackBerry, to when Android and iOS are coming into the enterprise, you know, and looking at that, and then using PKI and putting certificates on these devices and using the SCEP to identify them. But, you know, if you were to think about like the kill chain in that regard, there's Lockheed Martin's kill chain, right? We talked about MITRE and attack, but right, very simplistic, right? You could, same thing, you could get into one of these platforms and then I can issue a device certificate to my attacker device, right? Not unlike doing a SIM swap, right? But now I'm also maybe provisioning a machine identity to that device. And then I can go and log in and do all sorts of things, change policies, put you know, different types of software on there, coupled with living off the land. Oof, you could do some pretty nasty things, you know. So it's one of those things where it's the ability for attackers, like they have so many goodies in the candy store they can pick from, let me put it that way.
Yeah.
That it's very difficult, and I agree, and that's where one of the discussions I got into in a closed session with some practitioners, and Google was there with me as well. Great conversations. One of the things we said was false positives, like with agents and stuff, like just brace yourself for more false positives. But we're not saying, you know, the sky is falling and just open your floodgates, right, and let the floods come in. No, that's not what we're saying. What we were saying is, and it goes with your last word you mentioned, or theme you mentioned, many years ago, right? We were trying to prevent everything from happening, right? Like just try and block all the malware and try and block everything. And, you know, if you tighten everything up, nothing will happen. Well, I think, you know, it's probably 10 years ago, I would say, plus or minus, that the industry was like, you know what, stuff's going to happen. And that's when the whole birth of the incident response industry really started to take off. And then we started seeing like, hey, it's incident response. Like, you will get breached. It's a matter of when. You need to identify it, contain it, and recover, right? As you just mentioned. Well, we need to do the same thing with things like false positives, especially with agents, because these agents we don't fully know yet. We'll keep the human in the loop. But as we turn the dial up on making them more autonomous, we're going to have a lot of false negatives and false positives. We just will. And anyone that doesn't think you will, or any vendor that says we're going to have no false positives, well, they're lying to you, because we're all learning together. So what a light bulb that went off for me last week was build your people and process now to look for ways to optimize what you do today to deal with false positives and false negatives, and try and identify those quicker, get your learnings from them, and then update your platforms and your business process if it needs to change, so that you can handle that I think was like the best advice we can give the industry right now, just on the agentic side. But it very much connects back to your theme with just how complex these environments are now.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think there's definitely been a bit of an underinvestment in response recovery stuff. And we did some research on. I think one of the very first reports we did, the Cyber sort of 4.5 years ago, was something like funding patterns in cyber for would have been 2020, 2021, so 5 years ago, essentially. And it was probably, I think it was over 500 vendors had received funding. And we then mapped that against the NIST cybersecurity framework. So identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and just basically see where those vendors would have dropped into those buckets. And it was like less than 5% were in respond and recover. Everything was in protect, essentially, or whatever, 60, 70% was in protect. So I think there's been a huge underinvestment there, which is a problem. I guess, time will tell on that one whether that is a thing. And I guess a couple of other areas to point out. Privacy is starting to become more of an interesting topic, and I mean this in a slightly different way to what privacy's always been thought about.
Okay.
And it's we have things like GDPR, and everyone thought that's going to give this big privacy sort of leap, and yes, maybe to an extent that has happened, but again, there was numerous attacks, responsible disclosure around privacy related matters. So not just the security angle, but this was another example about traffic analysis, for example, and poorly designed protocols essentially leaking information which could infer things like how many people are in the building based on motion sensors and all this sort of stuff. And it's, that's not that interesting. Well, it's really powerful, because you just overlay that with other pieces of information you have, and it's very easy then to track or to analyze a building, to work out who's in there, what they're doing, when they're doing, what their pattern of life is. So privacy is still not fixed. And I think there's, again, numerous talks about, yes, we may do the confidentiality thing. Privacy is not being done. And the likes of GDPR and the CRA and others, at a very high level, they aren't prescriptive around specific aspects of privacy implementation based on traffic or based on payload, sort of normalization and other stuff. So there's I just want to flag that, because we talk about privacy.
That's interesting.
Flippantly, but it doesn't go. And the other couple of things I want to just pull up here. There's a lot of stuff happened. I want to pull out a couple of.
Go for it. Go.
Okta did a good Okta research. This is not Okta, selling single sign-up. Okta research, Fairlou, did really good stuff on phishing analysis. So an 18-month project, basically 3 billion authentication events, a lot of events that. Looking at how to categorize it, how to understand where phishing is coming from, what to do. And again, the TLDR is phishing isn't fixed. We haven't sorted that one out yet. And the other one I want to pull out actually was, I got a really interesting demo by a vendor called Capsule Security. So you had another vendor using security as their top level domain, which is very interesting, because again, we're all talking about identity changing. I'm not saying Capsule are an identity vendor. They're not specifically, they're more on the agentic side, but clearly have a security title. Anyway, they did a demo looking at securing agentic AI, and they essentially they went through the very, very fresh OWASP top 10 for agentic. Now, let me share this screen instead. So obviously, for those are probably very familiar with OWASP, they do a whole host of things like cheat sheets and web application security stuff, and they do top 10s, the top 10 problems across APIs, web apps, etc. They've done one for agentic, which only came out on the 9th of December, and I would thoroughly recommend people have a quick read through this. And it's a fascinating read. I'm not going to go through all of this because you've all got eyeballs and you can read this yourself. But there's some interesting top 10 problems, and I thought these are very interesting. So number one of the OWASP top 10, agentic goal hijack. So as you would expect, doing bad stuff to essentially tell the agent to forget about booking your travel tickets and whatever, go and do something else. So obviously there's things you need to think about there. Number 2 in the list, tool misuse. So again, this is looking at things like MCP, that's under the hood there, and how that can be abused. But obviously, of more interest to us, I suppose. Number 3, identity and privilege abuse. So impersonation, permissions not being validated, permissions being passed across from human into the agent and other stuff. So it's great. It's great because identity is obviously at the core. But obviously, it's a critical part of this stuff. Supply chain, we've just been talking about that. Unexpected code execution, memory and text, memory and context, poisoning, interagent comms. Again, there's a huge identity issue on this. Human to agent trust exploitation, rogue agents. So it's great because identity is just littered all the way through this. So that was a really good. It's a good. I won't say takeaway. Good to see again. Just the fact that identity is part of these conversations. We're not just looking at sort of specific pillar aspects of the agentic world. And we need to think of it as a first-class citizen for identity. You've got to talk about governance, auth-N, auth-C, authorization, relationship and impersonation to the person. There's the data angle to it. So there's a lot going on there. So shout out to the OWASP stuff. It's good.
Yeah, I was going to say shout out to Capsule as well. I know Ladan and Naor, really, really good, doing some interesting things there. Yeah, that's great. You got a good list here, right? I think it's just when I look at that top 10 list, right? And again, going back to your previous point on the MDMs, right, with Avanti, just again that notion of supply chain, but forget about supply chain. It's more of an ecosystem in that, like if something bad happens in the ecosystem, that pollutant, right? If it's a pond, can spread and affect all the organisms, right? So I think that's where, the standards have to come in, the sharing of information, certainly with the practitioners, those like ISAC groups like FS ISAC, for example, and aviation's ISAC, sharing all the information and understanding what those are, because we're going to be learning as a community. When you look at those, all of the issues with the agents, it amplifies current issues we already have across your full IT stack, but it also adds new areas, as I think we can kind of see when you just go through the table of contents, Simon, between all of these. And to me, it's like a hyper on steroids, like going to the cloud. When we went to the cloud, we were like, oh, it's solving all of these security issues, right?
Yeah.
But then it's opened all these other new ones. And that's why we have companies like Wiz. But it's like, I think it's that, but it's even crazier, So I'm just like, oh my gosh, maybe I need 5 more hats like this to cover myself up. I have no idea.
It's great. It's good. I'm gonna do a deep dive on that OWASP top 10 soon, because I think there's some really, really good stuff in there. And I think it's getting everybody talking the same language, focusing on the same points, and I think it's definitely there. We're going to wrap up quickly. We've got 2 minutes. One last question, as we always do. 2026. As succinctly as you can, just what are you expecting? Not necessarily the big full 12-month prediction, but any areas that you think are going to bubble up, disappear, what you're looking forward to? What does 2026 look in your eyes?
I'll go on AI, but I'll take kind of two pieces of just my piece on this. So one, I will say that it's all been, AI hasn't actually introduced any new business models to organizations. It's just all been about efficiency. I think next year we will, number one, organizations are going to go, maybe they leaned in a little too hard on AI, expecting it to do too much. I think that's going to happen. But the other, I do think on a positive side, that we'll start to see some new business areas that will be created by AI that we haven't thought of yet. So I think that's going to be my thing. And then the last piece I'll just mention, I think, just further maturity of the concepts around kind of security and identity around agentic AI. I think it's good as we're ending the year off with MCP getting in the Linux Foundation. I think we'll see some more evolution. I don't think we're going to solve everything next year for sure. I mean, that's kind of an easy one, a softball. But what I mean by that is I think we're going to encounter some more novel issues that are going to require collaboration in our ecosystem to figure out how to solve those. And I think next year is going to be a big year for that. Those are my predictions.
I like it. No, I like it. I think AI. I think AI will be done. Come April, I think AI will be finished. The whole fads. We'll be going back to hammers and nails and manuals. So obviously, of course not. But I think
who knows?
we could be toast. We could be replaced by a couple of cyborgs or something. That could be probably a beneficial thing. I think clearly AI is not going away. I think I'm going to go some slightly more pragmatic ones. I think I want to see, and I'm hoping, I think this is going to be true. A lot of the existing problems we have. So crappy AI, AAD group descriptions, role-based access control that doesn't work, MFA enrollment that's poor, ghost accounts, workloads that have no ownership or discovery. Like really, all the stuff which it's not sexy. Nobody does it. It costs an arm and a leg because you have to buy manual IGA tools or PAM tools and all that consultancy stuff, and it still doesn't work. I'm hoping AI can accelerate the extinction of some of these things. So again, start small. Get rid of groups that aren't being used. Find the accounts that are being used and find an owner for them. Go and remove all of your ghost accounts. All this stuff which we've been talking about for years and years and years. Take the man out of the loop or the woman out of the loop and get some AI in there and fix some of these really basic first-party problems, the problems we've had for a long, long time. We don't need big, sending rockets to the moon autonomously or anything clever. Start small and get some real belief and confidence and automate some of those key problems. It doesn't even need to be complicated AI. It could probably machine learning and some of this stuff, but just building blocks, and then maybe look at agentic for some really prescriptive workflows that can be completed and done. But start small and eminent. That to me is my hope, and I'm hopefully sitting here in 12 months' time, things are a bit rosier.
Okay.
But David, we should probably do this podcast in 12 months' time and see what happens, whether we are right or wrong, whether we are still here or automated. But David, thank you as ever for sharing your words of wisdom with your fantastic headgear. That's fantastic. Hopefully you will get some downtime.
I don't.
It's lasted as well. Look at that. That's amazing.
It has.
Hopefully you get a bit of downtime over the festive period. Same to our listeners, wherever you are in the world, wherever you celebrate or don't celebrate, please take some time out, put the laptops away, go for a walk, read a book, do some nice, relaxing things, and come back in January 2026. Merry and strong, and looking forward to our AI world. So, David, thank you for joining me. Thank you to our audience as well. Happy Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.